Good evening, YouTube. Tire Metalhead Weatherman here. Hopefully, you guys are doing well. Sheesh, it's been a pretty crazy day. Really, just now settling in at home. It's been a long day. It's been a ridiculous day for a number of reasons. One of them being that the water decided to be shut off at probably like 9 or 10 o'clock last night, and we're still having problems with it now. I've pretty much I have hot water, but it's all coming out cloudy. It's a mess. Apparently, it was a water main that broke up the road. But yeah, it's been a pretty crazy day. Still is a little crazy, but we're getting towards the end of it now. That being said, tonight's video is a little interesting here because there's stuff going on multiple fronts. We have the atmospheric river to talk about. Things are really going to start to pick up over there towards the west as time goes on. And then, of course, we still have a winter storm that we will be looking at as we close in on the weekend. And maybe another system that will be coming behind that. We're only going to cover one of those tonight in lieu of time because I already know that this video is going to be up kind of late. Apologies for that, but just some things were out of my control today. That being said, let's start out with what's going on out west, work our way east. There is a small marginal risk for some excessive rainfall. There is also a marginal risk for severe weather, but from what I've seen in the little bit of time that I've been here looking on the models and all the outlooks, no severe reports at this time. Most likely will be staying that way given the fact that we've lost daytime heating. So the real story is going to be more so what's happening out west. If we look at day 2 tomorrow, take a look at that. That area in the red right there is a moderate risk for excessive rainfall. So essentially what's going to happen is exactly what we were worried about over the last really couple of weeks. I've touched on it here and there, but essentially pretty much from all the valleys from the Sierra Nevada here, when these storm systems start rolling in, it's just going to bring in a huge plume of moisture. And it's going to stay in these valleys in the lower elevations, and we're going to get rainfall, and a lot of it. It's just going to be bringing in a huge train of moisture that just won't seem like it wants to move. So, and this rainfall isn't necessarily going to be light. It could be moderate to even heavy at times. So what's going to end up happening here is we're going to see these rainfall totals pile up really quickly, and the threat for flooding will begin to exist as time goes on. Further off to the east, it's for the most part business as usual. There's a chance for some flooding, but it's relatively minimal at this time. We go to day 3, and we still have that moderate risk ongoing, although the excessive rainfall rates moderate risk kind of goes away. The excessive rainfall rates are still the same. A little less coverage right now, but we'll have to see if this trends the opposite way and starts to go back, or whether or not we see further downtrending, which is what we're hoping for here. But this even includes some parts of the Sierra Nevada as we're starting to see that cold air push to the east here. Some warm air is going to start to advect here, and it's going to make those temperatures go above freezing for some of those lower elevations, maybe even on the base of some of these mountains. So what's going to end up happening now is all that snow also can start to melt, and the flooding threat will start to increase across this region. That's the downside to having such an active winter. If everything melts all at once, we get rain all at once. Any one of those factors right there can lead to an increased threat of flooding. But that's what we have heading towards the weekend. And then we already have a slight risk for day 4. And this is more so an experimental product with the excessive rainfall here. Day 4 and day 5. It's a little bit touch and go with that, but we're definitely already seeing a slight risk, so there's chance for this to be upgraded here. Another thing to also watch is these marginal risk a little further out the east, as we still have an active storm pattern going there as well. So with us knowing what to expect here across the west and really and really across the country as a whole, let's go ahead and take a look at the precip analysis here. This was ending as of 7 o'clock this morning Eastern time, or my time, so to speak. But we can already see that there's some activity off the northwestern coast here, although a lot of this is going to be falling as snow right now. It's still pretty cold across this region here. Precipitation really hasn't started to fall until recently across parts of the Southern California region where the greatest threat for excessive rainfall exists. We also have to keep an eye on this area over here where we're kind of dealing with that moisture flow that I've been also talking about for about a week now coming into play. This doesn't bring a high threat of flooding, yet the thing about that is it's still going to be causing disturbed weather across the country and minimal marginal chances of severe weather. Really, I don't expect much to come out of this, but we always have to keep an eye on it just in case. That being said, that's what we have going on for the rainfall. Let's go ahead and switch over to snowfall, because right now that's the main thing we're going to be talking about from in this video from this point onward. This is over the last 24 hours. We have a little bit of increased activity over towards the Dakotas and parts of Minnesota here. And of course, mainly towards the northwest, especially the northern Rockies here, we could be seeing a good bit of snow starting to develop here. Again, this ends at the same time, 7 a.m. Eastern, or this is actually at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So this is a little bit more accurate as to what we're dealing with in current time. We're maybe about an hour or two behind. So we're still seeing pretty impressive totals towards the northern end of the Sierras, and even heading into Nevada a little bit. We're starting to get increased snowfall. But I anticipate by tomorrow that these totals will increase notably, to say the least. So now that we know what's going on currently, let's go ahead and take a look at the vorticity now, because that's going to be a big factor. That's going to be a key in pointing out what we have going on down the line here. So this trough right here is going to be our player right here. It's not very impressive right now, hence why we aren't going to have much of a severe threat. We aren't able to really get any cold air to pull in with this system here. And what ends up happening as we head over towards the Ohio Valley, this low starts to strengthen. It starts to deepen just a little bit. Eventually, it does get a bit of a negative tilt here, and it also gets a little rush of cold air coming in around the backside of it, and more so towards the eastern flank here. So anywhere across this region right here, that's where we're going to start to see the potential for wintry precipitation exist. And that was a terrible drawing. I cannot move the mouse worth anything right now. But that being said, time goes on here. This low further deepens a little bit further, and then we will see an increased potential for maybe a little bit of wintry precip, even across areas such as New York City, Philadelphia, and even areas further up the northeast here. The New England area could definitely be in play, and there could even be a point where we can't rule out maybe even some parts of Maryland, maybe even DC, seeing a little bit of snow here. This all depends on how the moisture flow ends up coming into play here. Can't rule it out, but I don't expect big time totals. I think more so on the northwest side of things is where we can expect the increased totals. The moisture content is going to be a big key factor there. And then we have to watch this next system that's going to be heading into parts of Minnesota here, heading towards the Great Lakes as time goes on, as this could become a player when it comes to wintry weather across the Ohio Valley and even the Northeast. But we'll discuss that probably in tomorrow's video. We'll be in better range with the Euro, and we won't call it a weekend forecast, but it'll be a kind of a more in-depth look at this system here. There's still some things I'm trying to figure out with this right now. But we're going to go ahead and take a look at the temperatures here. Surface temps are going to be a big factor in all of this. It's not much in the way of warm air loft, so there's not going to be a huge battle zone here when it comes to ice, which is great news. If I had to pick, honestly, and this is just me personally, I would rather deal with snow versus ice any day. So when we head towards Friday, around 12Z. This is early in the morning for a lot of regions here. Those cold temperatures are starting to really take hold here across the northern tier of the U.S. And on the backside of that system, as we move this forward, we start to see that cold pushing into the Ohio Valley and then over to a large portion of the Northeast here. I think off the Great Lakes or just a little further inland around the Poconos especially, I think we could get some really impressive snowfall. And then, of course, as we head towards the Adirondacks, we have to watch that area, especially over towards those higher elevations. This is towards Sunday morning, towards the end of this model run here. We're getting some frigid temperatures coming into play here. So whatever falls does have a good chance of sticking for a bit here. So make sure you have your snow blowers in working order. Make sure that you have your snow shovels ready. Make sure you stretch before you do that too. That's a mistake I hear a lot of people make. They're not stretching before doing something strenuous like that. With these temperatures as well, for a lot of these regions, when the snow does start to fall for some of these areas, we're going to be close to that freezing mark. So it's not like this is going to be a dry snow. This is going to be most likely wet snow, which is a pain to shovel. I know it from experience. So if you happen to be in these areas and you're planning on going out into the driveway shoveling snow, make sure you are stretching in advance. There's no reason to throw your back out or anything like that. Just make sure you're doing what you need to do to take care of yourself beforehand, and then make sure you're doing well to recover after the fact here. Look at me, I'm sounding like a fitness trainer. It's a little tip for you, though. That being said, we know what the temperatures are looking like. Let's go ahead and take a look at what the precipitation could look like. Mainly been using the Euro on this one because it has a better presentation here, but the GFS and the Euro look pretty much identical at this point. There's a lot of confidence in this upcoming setup here. So we're just going to look at one model here. But this is what we're looking at as we head into tomorrow. Start to see widespread snow stretching across from Montana all the way in through the Dakotas and into Iowa. There's a little chance of some frozen precipitation, albeit brief, across the Iowa-Missouri line. And then as time goes on here, we see this start to stretch into areas like Minnesota, into states like Minnesota, large portion of Wisconsin, and then even heading into Michigan here. I do notice a slight trend to the south with this wintry setup as well. So that's something to keep an eye on if you're in northern Ohio, northern Indiana here. Even Chicago, we're watching you too. Detroit, we already have known that you were in the line for this, and that has not changed at all. Move this out the way. We see our low start to deepen here, and it really starts to pick up in intensity. This takes a little bit further of a dive to the south here, so we could see a changeover from rain to snow for some areas, especially over towards New York. In this setup here, Philly, you might get stiffed by the Euro here. That might be a good thing or bad thing depending on your perspective. And then here's our next big system right behind that coming into picture here as we head into Saturday afternoon. This will be increased snowfall across Minnesota and especially North Dakota this time. South Dakota, you're in play, but your snow period is going to be a lot briefer in comparison to what we are seeing with this system here. It does look like it tries to run out of steam here, but we'll have to watch how this low tracks. It looks like it gets kind of disconnected from the moisture here, but this still could come into play for some of these areas towards the northeast. There is also a chance that this could end up going north of the border. But given the fact that we're still waiting on the later Euro runs to come in here, it's gonna be interesting to see how this develops. I'm kind of leaning more and more so towards that, trending a little bit further northeast and not being as significant of a player, whereas before it looked like it was going to be slamming into the northeast as a pretty significant storm here. But I like the trend that I'm seeing here. It's kind of trending away, unfortunately, for some of you guys towards Minnesota, especially Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then over towards pretty much all of Wisconsin. Looks like this one is definitely bound to bring a little bit more snowfall. So far, it doesn't look quite as heavy as it did before. Of course, the GFS paints a different picture with this. but of course we're also getting further out in time. So there's a lot of there's a lot of things that need to be still figured out here as far as the models are concerned. While we're going on about that, let's go ahead and actually take a look at what our snowfall totals could look like throughout the next 90 hours. Of course, we already know the deal here across this region. Towards the western half of the U.S., snow is going to be plentiful and at times heavy, depending on elevation mostly, especially over towards the Rockies where we could see some ridiculous snowfall totals. 2 to 3 feet easily in a lot of places. Some areas going further beyond that. Sierras are getting ridiculous totals. I just saw 124. Good grief. Hopefully, anyone that's up that high and dealing with that kind of snow, hopefully you are prepared for that, because good grief, I can't even imagine. Especially in lowly little Georgia. But that being said, we also have to watch this big area right here, as we could see multiple systems coming into play here over the next few days, bringing in moderate to heavy snow, especially as we head towards tomorrow and beyond. I think that we could see some spots over here towards North Dakota in particular getting above a foot. We also have to watch a small portion over here towards northern Minnesota, where we could get some pretty impressive snow there as well. Large portion of Wisconsin in there too. And then again, like I said, right off those Great Lakes here, between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, we could see some really impressive snowfall coming into play. Also can't disinclude Chicago here, where we could see about 5 inches possibly according to the Euro. And of course, that's going to be stretching a little further out to the northeast. According to the Euro here, as far as Philly is concerned, you're going to be awfully close, but you might be able to get an inch out of the system here. New York City, you look like you're a shoo-in for this one. You're going to start out as rain from the looks of it, but you could see possibly up to 4 inches with this. Now, if we switch this over to the Canadian here, it's a slightly different look. This one has Philly more so in play with this one. Actually has New York less in play. So what I think is going to happen here with the Canadian, I think this has been pulled a little further to the south here. This even has parts of West Virginia here further in play, because if you compare it to the Euro, there's a small little swath here, but it's not quite as impressive. Whereas with the Canadian, we're even pushing into the southern Appalachians here. And then with the GFS is kind of doing the same thing that the Canadian is going with. I think the Canadian really goes off the GFS a lot of the time. I mean, both models are made in North America, so it wouldn't surprise me if the doctrines between those two aren't very dissimilar, but we'll see how this plays out here. Either way, it looks like for a large portion of the Northeast here, especially some of the larger cities, we could see some big-time snow. GFS is also very aggressive towards this area over here, as far as central and eastern Iowa, all of Minnesota. Not so much of Wisconsin this time, but over towards Chicago, we could actually see some higher totals, where we could get maybe even 8 to 10 inches. So, like I said, very active times ahead. A lot needing to be monitored here. Still marginal risk for severe weather, but also a big concern is the atmospheric river that is taking place across the west. We're going to continue to update that as time goes on. So one more thing to look at here, and that is the blend of models. This is the conservative approach, and usually, of course, as this name implies, blend of models. It's taking all the data from each and every weather model available and condensing it down to the most reasonable outcome possible. For the most part, we're seeing a mix more so between the GFS and the Euro here. Not so much, in fact, if anything, I kind of see more of a trend to the GFS right now. You remember, if we looked at the Euro in that last tab there, we were mainly seeing about 5 inches of snow. In this one, we're seeing about maybe 8 to 9. Which is leaning a little more so towards the GFS than Canadian. It's pretty much all the same out west totals are actually pretty spot on in either sense. But there's still some question marks here as far as what's going on for New York and parts of Philly here. We already know over towards the Poconos in particular, it's pretty good snow, pretty impressive snowfall expected. 3, maybe even up to 5, 6 inches possible. But a little bit of a question mark here also as we go further north here. The Adirondacks look a little less impressive, and then on top of that, I was expecting a little bit more action towards Maine too. So, a couple of question marks. We'll have to see how things progress from this point. It's going to be interesting to see how things develop from here, though. One last thing to look at, of course, will be the ice. And like I said, there's really not much of that to be had. Just figured that I may as well cover it just to ensure that there shouldn't be too much concern with that. If there's anything that's being hyped up at all, or anything that's concerning, I'd let you know, of course. But again, there's really not much of anything going here. The most concerning model is, of course, the NAM and the Canadian here. Only problem is this is over here towards Nevada, and this is mainly towards the higher elevations, where I think a lot of this is more so going to fall as maybe sleet or snow versus just freezing rain. Of course, we'll keep an eye on it, of course, as usual, but for the most part, I'm not too worried about that right now. This is just me more or less being honest. If we look at the other models, like the blender models, for example, there's no real ice threat. Even as we look towards the greatest area of quote-unquote interest here, we're only seeing a 1/10 and a 1/4 inch. This is mainly towards the mountains. So, like I said, good news is not a great ice threat with this one, and that's how we like it. But I know this video has been dragging on for a minute. I'm going to pretty much end it here. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you found it useful, you know what to do. Hit that like button. Subscribe already if you haven't. We recently just hit 300 subscribers. I'm thinking, who knows, maybe we could get to 500 by the end of the year. I think that'd be pretty cool. Let's see if we can make that happen. Also, of course, to anyone that's in one of these areas that's dealing with the atmospheric river or could be seeing some significant snow, of course, share this video to anyone that you might know that's in these areas, or just share it to anyone that may be interested in it. That never hurts either. But that being said, I'm going to call it a night. This has been Tire Metalhead Weatherman. Again, apologies for the video being so late. A lot of chaos going on. But keep your heads up. Take care, and I will see you in the next video. Have a good night.